Hey everyone, my name's Ryan Miller. I'm one of the members of the Bills in Buffalo group. The purpose of this presentation is to explore some of the social and economic benefits of building the new stadium in the city of Buffalo as opposed to Orchard Park. So I know everybody has their own individual preferences and opinions on where the stadium should go, and that's totally fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion on this. It certainly seems like the Pagula's opinion is that the stadium should go in Orchard Park, but I think it's important to consider, our preferences too, and by our I mean, taxpayers in Buffalo and Erie County, Western New York at large, because we're also contributing to this. It's not like the Pagulas are paying for this out of their own pocket. I mean, they're going to be contributing, but they're asking for our help too. They're asking for a public-private partnership in funding the stadium, and that's not uncommon. In fact, overwhelmingly, that's what happens across the country. In terms of football stadiums in the U.S., about 57% of the total cost of an individual stadium, on average over the years, is funded by the public, is funded by taxpayers. So, thinking about what that means here in Buffalo, according to the state study, the AECOM report there from earlier this month, the cost of building a brand new stadium in Orchard Park they estimate to be $1.4 billion. For building in the city at the South Park site, they estimate $1.8 billion. You may have seen $2.1 billion floated around for the city. That extra $300 million is for a dome, which may or may not have to happen in the city. Also, may or may not be a good idea for Orchard Park as well, but really the difference between Orchard Park and the city is only $400 million, at least according to the state study. That extra $300 is for the roof. But just using those figures, the 1.4, the 1.8, and then that 57% number, we're looking at about $800 million to $1 billion in taxpayer money. So I think all of us probably can agree, I think this is something everybody can agree on, that taxpayer money is being used. Like, we need to get some benefit. This needs to benefit our community at large, both now and for years to come, for generations to come. This is an unprecedented amount of taxpayer money, and there should be more of a benefit besides just keeping the Bills in Western New York. So what kind of benefits do we need to see from the stadium? I mean, Buffalo, for the first time in 70 years, is actually growing. The population is increasing for the first time since 1950, and the same is true for Erie County. And that probably shouldn't be a surprise for a lot of us who live here and have seen a lot of the momentum, growth, progress that's happened in this area over the last 10 years. But we still have a long way to go. So looking at the poverty rate in Buffalo back in 2006, before a lot of this positive momentum started happening, we had a rate of 29.9%. That's the second highest in the U.S. at the time. Today, the rate is nearly unchanged, 28.8%, still the third highest in the entire country. In Buffalo, 43.4% of children live in poverty. That's the second highest in the entire country. And roughly 16% of students in the Buffalo public school system have experienced homelessness. There's been a lot of high-quality research done in recent years that's tried to make sense of this issue we have in Buffalo with poverty. One such example is the Harder We Run, and this actually came out just a few months ago. It was done by a group of researchers at UB Center for Urban Studies School of Architecture and Planning, as well as the UB Community Health Equity Institute. And it's actually a follow-up to a 1990 report that was titled The State of Black Buffalo, which looked at a lot of socioeconomic variables at the time, particularly pertaining to black people in Buffalo, and made several suggestions for policy changes to help with addressing some of the inequity and disparities that affected black people at the time. So the Harder We Run essentially looked at, what's changed over the last 30 years. And if you allow me to share the data over the next few slides here. So full disclosure, I'm a white male that grew up in the suburbs of Buffalo originally, and I am far from the most qualified person to be talking about some of these issues. But I think this is super important and cannot be ignored, and I'm just going to do my best to try to present the research objectively. So in 1990, the unemployment rate for black people in the city of Buffalo was 18%. Fast forward to today, and it is 11% as of 2019, where we have the most recent data. But you compare that to white people also in the city, and that rate is 4%, so a huge difference there. In 1990, the average household income for a black household in Buffalo was $39,350, and that's adjusted for inflation, so that's in like today dollars. So, but today it's actually basically unchanged, $42,000. That's basically, there's no significant difference from 1990 in terms of the average household income. In 1990, approximately 38% of black people had an income below the poverty line. Today, that number is 35% still. In 1990, just 33% of black people actually owned the home that they lived in. The majority lived on the east side of Buffalo, and there were more black people in Buffalo without a high school diploma than with a college degree. Now today, still, only 32% own the home they live in. the majority still live on the east side of Buffalo, and there's nothing wrong with the east side. I mean, in fact, it has some of the most beautiful historic buildings, architecture, neighborhoods, character, really, in all of the city. But we can't ignore the fact that the east side has been historically neglected by local government, has been underfunded, and there's a lot of issues on the east side of Buffalo, which we will kind of explore further in this presentation. And still more black people in Buffalo today without a high school diploma than with a college degree. In this region, 14% of white people live in areas of concentrated poverty, while 64% of people of color do. In 2019, the median household income for black people in Buffalo was $28,320, with 35% living below the poverty line. Compare that to whites in Buffalo, and the median household income is almost double, and the poverty rate is almost 1/2. This is a quote from Reverend George Nicholas of the Lincoln Memorial Methodist Church on Maston Avenue. In a recent interview, he says, "The real Buffalo story is that a few have advanced and their lives have gotten better, but too many have been left behind." So why are so many people being left behind? If we're really experiencing such a renaissance here in the city of good neighbors, why are our poverty rates still so high? So examining some of the causes of poverty in general, for one, not enough income, and we're going to explore this more over the coming slides, but essentially, obviously, if there's just not enough jobs in the area, that's going to lead to not having enough income, but also not enough jobs that actually pay a living wage, not enough jobs that are stable throughout the course of the year, issues with childcare during working hours, transportation to and from the job, and then looking at expenses, money coming out compared to money coming in from work, money coming out going towards housing, childcare, transportation in general, as a cause of poverty, in terms of not having enough transportation options to give access to quality jobs, to give access to educational opportunities, so people can, graduate from high school, go to either a trade school or go to college and, better themselves so that they can get a higher quality job, to try to get out of this cycle of poverty. What are some of the consequences of poverty? For one, poor health outcomes. This is something we're going to touch on in a few slides. Poor educational outcomes, briefly talked about that on the last slide. Higher rates of crime, homelessness, and most importantly, more poverty. So all of these things are consequences of poverty and also causes of poverty. It is a kind of a complex, self-perpetuating cycle that, unless the underlying causes are really thoughtfully addressed, the cycle just continues and continues. So looking a little bit more in detail at jobs in Buffalo, according to a 2018 report, Buffalo-Niagara region has seen a decline in manufacturing jobs at a higher rate than most areas in the country. Approximately 1/3 of the jobs in Western New York are service sector jobs that pay less than $26,000 per year, and they're also less secure and stable over the course of the year. They tend to be more seasonal. So this is a map of unemployment rate in Buffalo by census tract, and you can see that the darkest shade of green represents unemployment rates of 21% or more. And nearly all of these tracts with this very high rate are on the east side of Buffalo. We also have some in the Black Rock area, as well as the lower west side and downtown area. And we're going to explore some of the reasons behind these unemployment rates throughout the rest of this presentation. So talking a little bit more about housing as a cause of poverty, and there's a lot of ways that housing impacts this, but I want to talk a little bit about home ownership specifically, because this is really the primary way that most people accumulate wealth in the United States. So in 2019, we kind of mentioned this already, 32% of blacks in Buffalo actually own their homes. You compare that to white people, and the number is 52%. Expanding out to Erie County, the difference is even more profound. So 33% of blacks in all of Erie County own their home, compared to 73% of white people. A lot of the disparities in home ownership can be traced back to racially motivated policies on the part of government as well as banks in the mid-20th century. On this slide, I want to examine kind of what it means to rent and how that can lead to poverty. So right now on the east side, it's estimated about 55% of residents who are renting pay more than 30% of their income on housing, and actually 36%, so like a third, are actually spending more than half of their income per month on housing. So how can you get ahead? How can you get out of poverty if more than half of your income is just going towards living, just having a house or a roof over your head? And there's this really interesting example in The Harder We Run that, suppose you're making $11,000 a year, all right? According to this 30% figure, that's really the mark. You don't really want to be spending more than 30% of your income on housing. So say, according to that 30%, you should be paying $275 a month on living, and the rest, should be for other things. So the average rent on the east side is about $670. The median value of an owner-occupied unit in this neighborhood is $54,000. So if a renter lived in this property paying the 670 a month for only 7 years, that would be enough to actually pay for the entire house. But of course, it's got to be nearly impossible to get approved for a mortgage if you're only making $11,000 a year. And I don't know how you can save up for a down payment when nearly half of your income every month is going towards rent. So it becomes very difficult for someone to break that cycle, to actually get out of the cycle of renting, and each month they have this huge chunk of their income that is just going towards nothing. Now, even in the scenarios, and this is not for everybody, but for a lot of people in Buffalo, the authors of The Harder We Run argue that a lot of homes on the east side, and for black-owned homes, they actually produce debt, not wealth. And the authors in The Harder We Run argue that this is because of a lack of investment in the area, specifically talking about the east side, on the part of local government, which has led to poorly maintained rental properties, an abundance of vacant lots that are unkept, overgrown, and these properties depress property values on the east side. And the authors argue that the result is what they call racial residential segregation, and it traps black people in low-value, marginalized, and underdeveloped neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods, in turn, become the sites of predatory inclusion, public sector underdevelopment, profiteering, and exploitation. This map is really helpful when thinking about this idea of racial residential segregation. So we're looking at property values here in Buffalo, and things are divided by quadrants, and the quadrants are essentially, based on home value, average home value, and you can see that the lowest value homes are in blue, and that's quadrant 4 here. And this really kind of corresponds to that other map from a few slides ago. For unemployment, we can see that the east side is primarily affected. The lowest value homes are here on the east side, as well as a little bit in the old First Ward and in South Buffalo. And the significance of this is that, suppose you are, fortunate enough to be able to purchase a home here, you're able to save up for a down payment, you buy a home. Your home here is not going to serve as the same wealth producing tool as it might if you were able to buy a home in quadrant 1 or in quadrant 2. Those homes are more stable over time, their value are probably going to appreciate, whereas in quadrant 4, you may have a couple of vacant lots on your street. You may have homes that are owned by landlords that don't even live in Buffalo, and they don't take care of the property, and that affects your property value as well. And so over time, owning a home here is not necessarily going to help you the same way it would if you lived here or here. It's not going to help you gain wealth, help you get out of poverty. And when we look at who lives in quadrant 4, right? So 73% of black people in Buffalo are living on the east side. Quadrant 4 is 68% black people. Median household income here is $24,000. Only 12% have college degrees. And the next slide has this map from this report called A City Divided, which I highly recommend looking at, segregation in Buffalo over time and how it still impacts things today. So this is a map of Buffalo. This is Main Street, and you can see that, as we know, primarily the east side is a predominantly black area, and you can see again quadrant 4, the way that this is the lowest value home. So again, the implication is just because you're able to buy a house here, it doesn't help you the same way it would somewhere else. So we need to address this. We need to find a way for property values on the east side to increase. We need to address the issues with vacant lots, with properties that are not being kept up with. We need, our government to spend more money and invest more resources in the east side to help increase property values and help make it possible for these homes to actually serve as a tool to help people accumulate wealth and better their lives. So I want to shift focus to transportation issues as a cause of poverty. And here we're looking at a map again of Buffalo by census tract. This time we're looking at the percentage of households in a particular census tract that do not have a vehicle. And the darkest shades again are the ones that are most affected. So all of these really dark census tracts here, they have 43% or more of the households in these census tracts do not have a vehicle. Again, we're looking at the east side being primarily affected, Old First Ward, Lower West Side, and then up into Black Rock. These are the areas that have the lowest rates of vehicle ownership, and you can see lots of similarities in terms of the previous map with unemployment rates. And really, when you think about it, these areas are the most dependent on public transportation. So people who live here need public transportation in order to be able to go to work, to be able to go to the grocery store, to be able to go to school. We very much need high quality public transportation to serve these areas. So let's talk a little bit more about the existing public transportation offering here in Buffalo, which of course is operated by the NFTA. They serve Buffalo, Erie County, and Niagara County. Looking at some stats here, so this shouldn't be a surprise based on the previous slide where we learned that the east side, the west side tend to have the highest rates of homes that do not own a car. So and these areas also tend to have strong Black population, Latino population, Pacific Islander population. So it makes sense that these groups rely on public transportation more to get to work, compared to only 5% of white people, white workers relying on public transportation. Now, the average Black worker in Buffalo who rides the bus spends on average 59 more hours in transit per year than a white bus rider. So think about that. That's over like a full work week, right? So a 60-hour work week is a really intense work week. And we're not talking about a white person that drives. This is a white person that also rides the bus. So there is a clear disparity in terms of the efficiency of public transportation in the way it serves Black people in Buffalo and the way it serves white people. And if we look at comparing a Black worker riding the bus compared to a white person that drives, we're talking about 180 hours. So that's like, if you're saying a 40-hour work week, that's literally a month. So over 4 weeks of time per year, a Black worker is just riding the bus, and a white person who drives has an extra month of free time in comparison. So this is the time travel penalty, as it's called in the research, and the implications are that the people have less time to, one, pursue other jobs to try to make more money, two, pursue educational opportunities to go to school at night to try to get a degree to get a better job. They have less time to just spend quality time with their family, spend time with their kids, take care of their kids, read to their kids. And this alone can serve as a barrier to people being willing and able to work. So clearly the existing offering is not super efficient in terms of getting people to and from work, and this has lots of implications. But what's even more staggering to me is the amount of jobs it does reach at all. So the existing offering from the NFTA, and this is including the buses, the Metro Rail, everything combined, it only combines to physically reach 42% of the jobs in Erie County. So over half of the jobs in Erie County cannot be reached by public transportation. And this is not necessarily the NFTA's fault. This is an issue in funding. The organization has not got enough funding. Looking at our existing system in comparison to other systems in cities across the country, we ranked 63rd according to this study that looked at 17 different key metrics for public transportation. And despite not doing really well in that study, we actually ranked 90th in terms of the ticket price. So we're charging more and we're getting less in comparison to other cities. So I promise we are going to get to what all of this has to do with a football stadium shortly, but I want to just spend a few minutes talking about some of the consequences of poverty. And the thing that immediately jumps to mind for me as a physician working in the city of Buffalo is the effects on healthcare. So I'm just going to go through some statistics here in Erie County, and we're going to talk about this in a little more detail. So 60% of Black people in Buffalo die before age 75. For white people, that number is only 36%. In Erie County, Black babies are twice as likely to be born at a low birth weight as white babies, and the infant mortality rate is 11.3. So that is a number that is comparable to a third world country. Like third world countries have rates that are in like the 11 to 14 per thousand live birth rate range, and we can see white babies in Buffalo, the rate is 4.7. A couple more metrics here. So looking at cervical cancer, this is something that really is largely preventable for the most part nowadays through vaccination, through the Gardasil vaccine, as well as the older way of kind of preventing it was just getting a regular pap smear so that you could find cervical cancer in the precancerous stages and watch it and or treat it before it develops into cancer. So for Black people, the rate is twice as high in Erie County compared to whites. And looking at female late-stage breast cancer, so this is breast cancer that's being found at a stage where it's already spread outside the breast, it's already spread to other organs, and generally at that point it's not really something that can be cured any longer. The rate for Black people is 61.1 per 100,000. For white people, 41.4. Cervical cancer, breast cancer, these are all things that can be prevented to some degree just through regular appointments with your primary care doctor, and access to being able to go to get a mammogram at an imaging facility. So clearly there's some disparity here. All right, so looking at asthma and COPD, so both of these are chronic respiratory illnesses. Asthma is something that's usually presents in childhood. There are some genetic factors associated with the development of asthma, but also environmental factors, exposure to certain things in the air have been shown to lead to the development of asthma. And there's some very kind of depressing data looking at asthma rates, asthma exacerbations, and looking at where people live. And it really follows the path of the 33 on the east side. All of the exhaust from the cars and pollution that the 33 puts into the air of those neighborhoods. It's theorized that is at least partially, if not totally, responsible for the very high rates of asthma on the east side. COPD, also 4 to 5 times more likely than white people to be admitted. Asthma and COPD are also diseases that require, a very good primary care presence, teaching patients how to use their inhalers properly, how to avoid certain triggers. Both of these diseases can be managed much better. People can be kept out of the hospital, have better quality of life if they have a good doctor that's taking care of them, if they have access to that doctor and to the medications and the educational resources. Similarly, diabetes, same thing. If you have a doctor that you trust, if you have people to help educate you on changes you can make to your diet, educate you on the medications that may be prescribed, educate you on how to use insulin if you need insulin. All of that is something that can help manage diabetes, help prevent the complications of it, help keep people out of the hospital. And clearly there is some disparity between black people and white people in terms of that measure, the hospitalization rates. And to me, it's really clear that it's an access issue and access to quality primary care and all that goes along with that. Again, higher rates of obesity, heart disease, strokes than white people in Buffalo. So what I've been getting at in the past few slides and trying to explain the disparities in healthcare outcomes between black people and white people in Buffalo is this concept of the social determinants of health. This is a concept in medicine that refers to the conditions and the environment that people are born into, live, work, play, and age that can affect their health. And in the context that we're talking about, a lot of these social determinants are sequela of poverty and underinvestment in education and the supporting infrastructure of the communities that people are growing up in. So some examples of the social determinants of health, so poor housing conditions. We touched on this in regards to asthma and exposure to pollution from the 33. Another example would be lead poisoning from older homes in Buffalo that maybe aren't kept up as well. They have lead paint. Children are exposed to the lead paint, but the paint chips in their mouth, and that can be something that can really change the course of a child's life if they have severe lead poisoning as a child, and that's another thing too that can be really prevented through regularly going to your primary care doctor for checkups to get some education and counseling on how to avoid lead poisoning, as well as getting screened. We test all children in the city for lead poisoning fairly regularly at their well child visits, because if it's something that if you catch early enough, it's really treatable and you can prevent permanent problems. Lack of access to affordable, healthy foods. We're going to touch on this in an upcoming slide. Not having enough doctor's offices just in the community in general limits access, and then lack of transportation options to actually go to your doctor. Maybe your primary doctor is relatively accessible nearby. You can get there through the public transportation system, but you have an issue and they need you to see a specialist, and most of the specialist offices are more out in the suburbs or or downtown, like the medical campus, and maybe the transportation getting there is prohibitive. Maybe the same thing goes for tests, so getting like blood work done or getting a mammogram to try to catch breast cancer early, or to go for a colonoscopy to try to catch colon cancer early. All of these things require transportation, and if you live in a community where a third or more of the houses don't have a car, you're really stuck to rely on the public transportation system, which, as we've discussed, is very inefficient. It doesn't go everywhere that it needs to go, and it takes time. And so maybe you're going to a doctor's appointment and you rely on the bus, and then you get there late, and then they cancel your appointment, and they don't have another appointment for you for another month. So then you're stuck waiting a month, all because the bus couldn't get you there on time. A lack of access to quality education, employment opportunities. This is, again, it's kind of like a self-perpetuating thing. So if you don't have access to education, employment, to better yourself, to make more money, to try to maybe get get a car so you can drive yourself, or get on your employer's insurance to help with some of the medical costs. Again, you need access to those things, and transportation is a huge barrier, as we've touched on it in that regard. Neighborhoods where maybe the sidewalks aren't kept up, and maybe there's higher rates of crime because there aren't a lot of educational opportunities there. It's hard to find a job, and so naturally, crime rates are going to be higher when there's no reasonable way to make a living wage. And living in a community like that has higher rates of crime limits people's comfort with going out for maybe a walk or a bike ride. And so maybe people are more sedentary. They're not exercising as much, and that has health consequences. So a food desert is an area that has limited access to grocery stores and supermarkets, either because there's simply just not a grocery store or supermarket nearby at all, or for a transportation barrier perspective, that it's very difficult for people to go to that particular store. And the consequence of this, if you just kind of think about living in a community where there's no grocery store nearby, also maybe you don't have a car and you're forced to rely on public transportation to get to the grocery store that's 10 miles away, it's more likely than not that you're probably going to go to maybe a convenience store or a gas station or a corner store nearby to get your food, instead of going to a grocery store where you might be far more likely to pick up fresh produce, fruits, vegetables, meats, things that are part of a healthy diet. Whereas if you're just going to the corner store and picking up a bag of chips or candy or pop or soda or some processed meal, you can see that if you're doing that over time, if you're relying on the gas station for your meals over time, it's not surprising that you're probably going to have a higher rate of diabetes, heart disease, etc. And so in Buffalo, this is food desert is not a thing that's only in Buffalo. This is a concept throughout the country. But looking at the food deserts that we have here in Buffalo, there are 51 census blocks in Buffalo that have limited access to supermarkets. Every single one of them is located east of Main Street, on the east side, essentially. And Buffalo's African American residents are 6 times more likely than whites to live in a neighborhood without an access to a grocery store. So this is a map looking at food deserts in Buffalo, and the shaded census tracts here are the ones that have limited access to grocery stores, supermarkets. Here, with the laser pointer, this is Main Street here, so we can see everything east is where the food deserts are. And then the different colors of the census tracts corresponds to the percent of that census tract that's made up of people of color. So the darkest one is 92% or more of the people living in that tract are of color. And again, just like with some of these other maps I've shown you, the east side is just preferentially afflicted here with this problem as well, with access to quality, affordable food. I just wanted to share a few more statistics on some of the consequences of poverty aside from how it relates to healthcare. So looking at education in the U.S., students in the bottom 20% of family incomes are 5 times more likely to drop out of high school than those in the top 20%. And here in Western New York, 74% of the variation in test scores between schools in this area can actually be, according to this 2018 research study, explained by difference in poverty populations, income of the household that students are coming from. So, pretty clearly poverty is affecting education, which, long-term, without education, students are far less, likely to get quality jobs, better themselves in some way, and be able to escape the cycle of poverty. So again, it just kind of is a self-perpetuating thing. And in terms of crime, people living in poverty are twice as likely as those with high incomes to experience violent crime. And in 2015, Buffalo was ranked 15th in the country for violent crimes among major cities. So I want to shift focus now to some of the solutions to combating poverty, some of the ways that we can try to end this cycle of poverty here in Buffalo. And I want to share, a couple of perspectives from people who are far smarter and more educated on the topic than myself. So the next few slides are gonna be doing that. So this is coming from a really comprehensive, detailed, and impressive report that I've cited, multiple times in this presentation, that was titled "Advancing Health Equity and Inclusive Growth in Buffalo." And so one of their solutions is they say that 2014, 72% of youth in the city of Buffalo were people of color, compared to only 41% of seniors. And this is what's referred to as a large racial generation gap. And in their research throughout the country, this often corresponds with lower investments in educational systems and the infrastructure needed to support youth. And they identified these as being 2 areas that Buffalo needs to improve upon. The researchers that wrote The Harder We Run give quite a few suggestions, and they talk about progress towards ending poverty and eliminating some of the disparities across racial lines here in Buffalo. They define progress as the movement of blacks in Buffalo towards a status where most African Americans receive a good education and have jobs that pay a livable wage. And the authors argue that in doing so, this progress will enable blacks to live in high quality and affordable houses in safe and vibrant East Side neighborhoods, attend and graduate on time from excellent neighborhood-based schools, and experience social well-being, joyfulness, love, and support. And they specifically talk about needing to counter racial residential segregation, which we've touched upon in previous slides here, that this is kind of a barrier to progress. And so they call upon the city of Buffalo as well as Erie County to fight to open all neighborhoods throughout Erie County to low-income residential development. So allowing some of these residents that are living on the east side that are facing some of these disparities and issues with access to work, education, healthcare, et cetera, give them an opportunity to live in a different area of Erie County where those same access issues don't exist. As well as simultaneously invest in the east side. So they say simultaneously transform and turning the east side into a desirable place to live for everyone to live, work, and raise a family. To making the east side a desirable place for anybody to want to live, not for black people, but for people who live in the suburbs or people who live in other parts of the city to want to move to the east side. Because in doing so, if you do both of these bullet points here, that will kind of eliminate this segregation that we have here in Buffalo, that is really, as we've talked about, contributing to poverty and inequity. Reverend George Nicholas, a pastor on the east side, was interviewed in an article for the Investigative Post recently talking about poverty in Buffalo. And he, unsolicited, brought up the Bill Stadium in this context. And he said that it would be laughable if it wasn't so painful to consider what that kind of money could do to help address poverty locally. So talking about, $1.4 billion for Orchard Park, $1.8 billion in the city. What could, Buffalo look like? What could we do for poverty with that money instead of investing it in a football stadium? And he says that the answer isn't just to keep feeding these systems that are going to feed people who are hungry. It's going down the line and finding out why they're hungry and then addressing those issues so they don't have to be in that position for a long period of time. And I think what he's saying is kind of similar to these other previous slides, getting to the root cause, these issues that we've identified with transportation as a barrier, education as a barrier, and investing there, as opposed to just trying to set up a soup kitchen to feed somebody that's hungry. Why don't you, instead of doing that, why don't you find a way to get them a job so that they can feed themselves? So one of the biggest reasons why they're hungry, to borrow the terminology that Reverend Nicholas used, I think we've identified as in Buffalo is public transportation, and then the inadequacy of the existing offering by the NFTA and the way that this serves as a barrier to access to jobs, to healthcare, to education, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to talk just a little bit more about some of the specific benefits of investing in public transportation, both socially, economically, because I really believe that this is the key to Buffalo's future. So for every $1 communities invest in public transportation, approximately $4 to $5 is generated in economic returns. And kind of breaking down how this happens, some researchers estimate that about 60% of this economic return is coming from effects on productivity for consumers as well as businesses, and some of this is coming from savings on vehicle ownership costs as well as travel costs in general. So $10,000 a year is the estimated cost of owning and maintaining a vehicle that includes car insurance and whatnot, versus if you were to have a 1-year pass for the NFTA, it would only be $900. 87% of trips on public transit have a direct impact on the local economy. So more investment in public transportation, more people riding, more impact on the local economy. The effects of having reduced traffic congestion, and then for businesses specifically having access to broader labor markets with more diverse skills when you have a better, more robust public transportation system, as opposed to the one that we currently have here in Buffalo that only serves 42% of the jobs that we have here in Buffalo. The other 40% of those economic returns are coming from creation of additional jobs, so jobs in construction to actually build out the expansion in public transportation, as well as manufacturing more trains, light rail cars, buses, etc. And then the creation of more long-term jobs within the specific transportation organization, like the NFTA, in management, in terms of vehicle operations, so like drivers of the buses or of the rail cars, maintenance of the buses, rail cars, etc., as well as maintenance of the facilities, like stations, the rail hubs, and whatnot. So not only does public transportation investment lead to the creation of jobs within the transportation organization itself, but it also leads to private investment. And it's estimated that for every $1 billion of continuous public transportation spending, 50,000 jobs, mostly in the private sector, are created. Additionally, it's estimated that for every $10 million in capital investment in public transportation, there's a $30 million return in increased business sales. And for every $10 million in operating investment, there's a yield of $32 million in increased business sales. Investing in public transportation also benefits homeowners that live in the area. So home values are up 24% higher near public transportation than in other areas of cities, and that makes sense because it's something that's desirable. Many people find it very convenient to be able to walk outside and go to a metro rail stop and get on a train, or go to a bus stop and get on a bus and have that public transportation then take them to other areas or events within the city. That's something that many people want, and it makes sense that home values that for homes that are in that kind of area would be higher. So another kind of similar thing, but for hotels. So hotels in cities that have direct access to their airports via public transportation, like a light rail or whatnot, are able to actually raise the price 11% more per room than cities that do not have that, such as Buffalo. So I was mentioning how many people find it desirable to live in close proximity to a public transportation stop. And it's not true just for people, but actually for businesses as well. Research has shown that high-tech, high-value industries are attracted to cities that have robust public transportation offering. And this is something that companies, whether they're from other cities in the U.S. or international locations, that these companies preferentially are looking to expand and grow their presence in cities that utilize public transit to provide access to the workforce. So from their perspective, they like public transportation because it expands their hiring pool and allows them to have access to more people with a more diverse skill set. A recent example of this is with Amazon. When they were choosing the city for their second headquarters, public transportation was an absolutely critical component of the comprehensive selection process that they underwent, and they actually eliminated several cities that people thought would be higher up on their list just because of public transportation inadequacies in those cities. And just looking at a few more benefits of public transportation aside from the social and economic benefits, it's been shown to have positive impacts on the health of the population that it serves. So a study out of Australia that looked at a city that expanded their public transportation, they found improved population health measures in that city due to an increase in physical activity from walking to and from the public transportation. And they found that this reduced the disease burden from diseases that are typically associated with inactivity and obesity, and this actually led to reduced healthcare costs for their health system. High-quality public transportation that is convenient and comfortable has been shown in research to lead to increased physical fitness of the population that it serves, improved mental health, reduced traffic crashes, reduced pollution emissions, and provide better access to medical care and healthy food. And in terms of the environment, approximately 85% of the greenhouse gas emissions that come from transportation are due to people day-to-day commuting in their personal vehicle. And by leaving a car at home, a person can save up to 20 pounds of carbon dioxide emissions per day. So what does the Bill Stadium have to do with all this? When you think about it, we've clearly identified that infrastructure improvements and a massive investment in public transportation in this city are critical to addressing many of the root causes of poverty and so some people will talk about transportation as a reason against building it in the city, and they'll say that the existing infrastructure isn't adequate, there's not enough parking, it'll take longer to get in and out of the stadium, et cetera, et cetera. And I highly encourage you guys to watch on the next slide. There's a link to a presentation that Ben Siegel gave. Ben is our architect and one of the co-founders of Bills in Buffalo, and he put together a very extensive proposal and presentation on the South Park site and all the intricacies of it, and he makes a very compelling case that one, the parking is already there, that really the parking around this site is already comparable to what's in Orchard Park, and that the existing roads in Buffalo may actually be more favorable for traffic patterns, as well as adding in public transportation as well as a way of getting people in and out of the stadium, that we're actually probably going to look at a stadium in the city as being more efficient, that people will spend less time in traffic, and then people will come in and say, oh yeah, that's great and all, but what is it going to cost? And we'll talk about that more in coming slides, but the cost really, there's the new infrastructure bill that was just passed, and then we'll talk a little bit more too about how building downtown may actually, because of tax credits, make this more affordable than building in Orchard Park. So this is a link to the presentation that Ben gave. So I want to be a little bit more specific with the public transportation changes or expansion that I'm talking about in order to serve the Bill Stadium as well as the benefits that it would provide for our community. And so this map is taken from a group called Citizens for Regional Transit. It's a local organization here in Buffalo that advocates for expansion of public transportation, and they have these really impressive detailed maps on their website that show existing rail lines. And so this is from their website. So in green here, this is existing rail tracks that go out to the south towns, and then they kind of merge together here in like South Buffalo, Old First Ward area, and basically where my cursor is here, the laser pointer is where the South Park site is, and then these tracks link up kind of behind where the Sabres Arena is at the DLW terminal. So they would connect the South Towns to Bill Stadium here, and then continue on to, this is the main subway or metro rail line here in black. And then also there are existing rail tracks that go from this area here out to the airport through the east side. That's this line here in red. So I wanted just to provide that, and we're going to talk more about that and build more on that in the coming slides. And you might be wondering, like, why do we have to do this with the Bill Stadium? Can't we just do this? Like, why does this have to be like tied to the Bill Stadium? And that's a valid point. I think that, yes, like that's true. Like, regardless of where the stadium goes, this is something we need to do. But we've known about this, for decades. Like, this has been an issue that Buffalo has needed to address for a long time, and it just hasn't really happened. And so I think that the Bill Stadium is a very unique opportunity to kind of force the issue at hand. To, you say the stadium's going here, and it becomes kind of the catalyst for igniting all of this development and expansion of public transit. That I think without the stadium to kind of justify it, for lack of a better term, I think it's probably unlikely to happen. And so, yeah, Citizens for Regional Transit has put together this plan, and we're going to kind of go through this in the coming slides. So just a little bit more about Citizens for Regional Transit. It's a grassroots organization here in Buffalo seeking to improve, creating a broad base of support for the improvement and expansion of bus and rail transit for all citizens of the Niagara Frontier. I highly recommend checking out their website. It's extremely impressive and comprehensive in terms of all of the research that they've done, studying the existing rail lines here. This map on the left is extremely detailed. If you open this file up, it's like massive, and you can just go down to to the street corner, and just to that level of detail of where the existing infrastructure is in place, as well as some plans that they have, not only for better connecting Buffalo, different areas of Buffalo to other areas of Buffalo, but also to connect us to other cities like Toronto and Rochester. And they also have, if you want to look on Google Maps, if you open this link on the right, you can look on Google Maps with these green and red existing rail lines that we talked about in the previous slide overlaid, so you can kind of see exactly where those are on a Google map. So I just want to talk about two specific extensions that Citizens for Regional Transit has researched and proposed, because these are the two that I think are most integral to putting the Bill Stadium in the city, as well as benefiting the city of Buffalo at large. So the first one is the East Side Airport extension, and you can see here it runs from essentially the First Ward up through Larkinville, the Lower East Side through Central Terminal, Broadway Fillmore area, and then it starts to head east all the way out to the airport, and even continues on to Transit Road. And then this is the South Towns extension. So this one actually has the potential to be one of the longest extensions and serve the largest areas. And you can see it kind of starts in the Canal Side area behind the Sabres Arena, where the DL&W terminal is, and that, as you might know, is currently being restored and renovated as part of the Buffalo Billion project. They got $20 million in funding, and the NFTA is already planning on extending the Metro Rail into the DL&W terminal and turning that building into, to have shops, restaurants, etc. So that's about here where my cursor is, and then these tracks, again, already exist, are taking off, heading south through the Old First Ward and South Buffalo area, and after it crosses the Buffalo River here, they split into two separate tracks, and then one kind of continues on into more Orchard Park. The other one continues on more into Hamburg, past the fairgrounds and whatnot. And so this is, important for a couple of reasons. One, obviously getting people into and out of the city on game days, but there's also this perpetual debate in Buffalo about the Skyway, which is not really the topic of this presentation at all. But if anything ever did happen to the Skyway, we would need to make other ways for people who live in the South Towns to have easy and efficient access into and out of the city. And so this is one other possible avenue for doing that. And it also would allow people that live in the city to have better access to going out into the suburbs and spending their money, in like the village of Hamburg at the restaurants and bars there, and same with Orchard Park. So you probably remember this slide from earlier. This is, again, looking at census tracts in the city of Buffalo that have the highest rates of households that do not have a vehicle. So again, these ones here, the darkest shade, 43% or more of the households in these census tracts do not have a vehicle. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of superimpose the proposals that we're making for expanding public transit in order to serve the Bill Stadium to get a better visual idea of what that might do for these neighborhoods. So you can see here I have drawn on the map a little bit. I put the South Park site as the star here. We have the existing subway / metro rail system that is represented in black here. And then the South Towns extension in green, just like it was on the previous slides. And then the airport east side extension in red. So what an impact this could have. I mean, looking especially at the east side airport extension here in red, look at all of these census tracts in communities where people, do not have a car and are so dependent on our public transportation system that is currently failing them. What a profound impact this specifically could do. Just think about, people who live in these communities having access to going out, to this airport and the suburbs out this way, for work or for school, having more access to job opportunities out here, having more access to job opportunities out here, and then being better connected to the city itself, being also getting access to job opportunities, via the subway up here in the North Towns as well. And so the thing is, this also could be paid for, right? Like there's this massive federal infrastructure bill that just got passed a few weeks ago, and the bill actually promises $39 billion towards expansion of public transportation. So this is something that could be covered, at least in part, if not totally, by this bill, and do so much good for the community. So same idea here. We saw this map earlier looking at food deserts in Buffalo. So you can see here there's several census tracts that would directly benefit from the airport east side extension, getting linked and having more access to supermarkets, grocery stores in the surrounding areas. And then, over time, these food deserts as well, this might change and we'll talk about this more, but the effect of public transportation on the economics of the area, on investment in the area, it could change the community to a point where more grocery stores and supermarkets want to, invest in these areas and build in these areas. And I think long term you could see, from a project like this, grocery stores starting to pop up in these communities as well. So let's do the same thing for unemployment. Again, the darker the shade, the more affected the area is. So these very dark shades are census tracts that have the highest unemployment rates. And here's what it looks like with the Bill Stadium at the South Park site and the transit expansion superimposed. So you can see that the census tract that the South Park site is in, as well as some of the surrounding neighborhoods and census tracts, are among those that are most afflicted with unemployment throughout Buffalo. And if you think about, jobs that could come from the stadium. So for one, actually building the stadium itself, as well as some of the infrastructure changes, public transportation expansion, certainly that would create, a ton of jobs. And those wouldn't be jobs that would last forever, but they would last for a considerable amount of time and would be easily accessible to people who live in these neighborhoods. Long term, we're looking at jobs in facility operations within the Bill Stadium itself. Jobs with concessions, jobs working for the team, managing the field, all sorts of jobs like that directly related to the stadium itself and the function of the Bills. But furthermore, you're also likely going to see a entertainment district that's going to pop up around the stadium. So more hotels, restaurants, local businesses in this area, that has such high unemployment rates. So lots of opportunities for people in these communities that really need it most, that need more access to jobs, to have a multitude of jobs created right in their backyard. Not only would we be creating jobs in these census tracts that have the highest rates of unemployment in our city, but we'd also be connecting the citizens that actually live in these census tracts to more job opportunities throughout all of Erie County. So Erie County is actually a county in which 4 of the 5 largest employment centers are located outside of the city of Buffalo. And when you look at this map with these census tracts with the highest unemployment rates, if you think back a few slides to that blue map, these are also many of the same census tracts that have the highest rates of households that don't own a vehicle. So these are the ones that are most dependent on public transportation. So think about all of the people who live here and are unemployed that with this extension to the South Towns, with this extension to the airport, to some of the eastern suburbs with a better connection to the city itself, think of all of the increased job opportunities that people that live here would then have. And furthermore, we'd see a lot more jobs created within the NFTA itself in terms of management to oversee, a vastly expanded public transportation system. They'd certainly have to hire a lot more people in that regard, as well as people to actually drive the trains, Metro Rail, buses, etc. People to do maintenance work on all of the equipment, as well as to do maintenance and staff and operate the transportation hubs and rail stations. Like we've talked about previously, public transportation leads to private investment. And again, it's estimated that every $1 billion of continuous public transportation spending, in this case, which could be financed not by us, but through the federal infrastructure bill, for every $1 billion in the continuous spending, you're looking at the creation of 50,000 jobs, mostly in the private sector. And this idea of transit-oriented development, so development that springs up along the routes of public transportation. So specifically on the East Side Airport extension, this could lead to an influx of private investment in the area, leading to a creation of additional jobs, and long-term, the revitalization of this area that's long been neglected. And again, we know that high-tech, high-value companies, industries are attracted to cities that have a robust public transportation offering because from their perspective, it gives them access to far more people to hire and a more diverse skill set of workers. So this investment on our part in improving our public transportation system long-term is going to give us a much better chance at attracting companies to come and make a headquarters here, to get a presence here in Buffalo. And that's something we need. We need to attract younger companies, tech companies to Buffalo to want to be here. And I think this is one foolproof way to do it. And long term, that's going to benefit these areas as well. These areas, again, that have high unemployment rates. We're looking at more jobs long term being created by attracting other companies to come here. I really believe that the economic potential of a more connected, accessible, and equitable Buffalo cannot be understated. It's actually estimated that Buffalo's annual GDP could be increased by $4.3 billion, which is more than double the combined annual budget for Erie and Niagara County, if it were to eliminate its racial disparities and divides. And I think this project would be a tremendous step towards progress in that regard. And one other thing to consider here, not just Buffalo being connected to other areas of Buffalo and Erie County and Niagara County, but really our area, our region being connected to other nearby cities like Toronto, Rochester, Cleveland, Syracuse. And Amtrak actually got $66 billion as part of the federal infrastructure bill to help enhance, improve, and expand their existing offering. And part of the plans are for extending 6 New York-Albany round trips to Buffalo, and they're working on reducing the trip time as well as 5 round trips from Buffalo to Niagara Falls, one of which would carry on to Toronto, so directly connecting Buffalo to Toronto via rail. They're also looking at doing the same thing between Buffalo and Cleveland. So as opposed to the public transportation expansion and improvements that need to happen directly in Buffalo and Erie County, which I think are highly dependent on the Bill Stadium going in the city to really force that issue, hopefully these proposals that are being talked about with Amtrak are going to happen kind of independent of what the bills do. But I do think that if the stadium went in the city, it would really support this happening, facilitate this happening, and maybe incentivize it to happen quicker or in a more robust way. Specifically with Buffalo and Toronto, I think that that's something that just makes so much sense for there to be a train that you can get on in Buffalo that would take you right to Toronto and vice versa. In terms of the effect of that on game days for Sabres games, but more so for Bills games, what we're talking about here, all the fans that come across the border on the bridge. For Bills games, imagine if they had a different way in to the city via a train that would drop them off, right at Canal Side. They could go to the Bills game, go to a Sabres game, or just come here to spend money to go to all the great attractions that we have here. So This would give an alternative way for Canadians getting in and out of town on game day, like we talked about. It would also connect our region to a whole new workforce, across the border, and vice versa. It would benefit, them as well. And so, again, imagining the economic benefits of a cohesive, shared, connected infrastructure, not only here directly in Buffalo and Erie County, but also connecting us, connecting the Buffalo Niagara region to Southern Ontario, to Greater Toronto area, connecting us better to Rochester, Cleveland. This is really the future to the long-term economic success of people in this area. One more thing to consider here is the effect on housing values. So you remember this slide from earlier. And then this is the same slide with the South Park site and the public transportation expansion superimposed on top. So we can see that the South Park site is located in an area that has some of the lowest housing values, kind of right in between Quadrant 4 and Quadrant 3 in terms of housing values in the city of Buffalo. And what could a stadium do? So some people have thought that this would maybe lower the housing values, but there's multiple studies, including like a meta-analysis that looked at a dozen different studies that concluded that a new stadium actually improves the housing values in the surrounding areas. And obviously these are some areas that could use some help in that regard. Not only could it benefit the immediate vicinity around the stadium, but also kind of the surrounding First Ward, as well as the Lower East Side. And this is actually something that was mentioned in the state study that was recently released, the one that was commissioned by Kathy Hochul. They estimated that over 30 years there would be an extra $53 million in tax collections based on property value in the housing that is in the near vicinity of the proposed South Park Stadium. And then one more thing to consider we talked about previously is the effect of not just the stadium, but the effect of the public transportation on housing. So we know that housing values are up to 24% higher when they're close to and have easy proximity and access to public transportation. And you can see here this, the expansion out to the east side and airport, as well as to the south towns. These are areas that have lower than average home values. So you're also increasing property value in this way as well. One last thing I just wanted to touch on is the issue, which is extremely valid, about displacing over 600 residents that currently live in the Buffalo Municipal Housing Association Commodore Perry housing project, which is on the South Park site. And the proposal is essentially to demolish this housing project in order to make room for either the stadium or parking or infrastructure or whatnot. And then the question is what happens for these people. This is their homes, where they live, and I'm very sensitive to that. I think that absolutely we need to make sure that their lives are not negatively affected by this, and hopefully there's a way to actually improve the lives of the people who live in this housing project currently. And I think there's a way to do it. Actually, one of the commissioners of the BMHA, Renato Graham, said that he believes relocating the residents is an opportunity for them to get better living conditions. And we'll explain more in the next slide. And I agree with Commissioner Graham. I think absolutely these residents that would be displaced absolutely deserve better, not equal. They deserve better than what they have now. And this should be a way to help them, better their life in some way. And I heard Rocco Termini, one of the other co-founders of Bills in Buffalo, at the city council meetings a few weeks ago when this was being discussed. He had an excellent idea. And instead of relocating residents to other BMHA sites throughout the city, what if instead of doing that we built them a house? What if they had their own house that they could use over time as a tool to accumulate wealth and prosper more long term, and maybe pass that on for generations to come. And I've been thinking about that idea that Rocco had, and I think one really excellent way that we could do that is by building those houses on vacant lots. So in Buffalo, if you look at this map on the right side, all of the little color are vacant lots, and the red specifically represent residential vacant lots. And you can see just visually most of the vacant lots in the city are on the east side, and the numbers bear that out. There's over 16,000 vacant lots in Buffalo. About 94% of them are on the east side. And interestingly, the city of Buffalo owns about 59% of the vacant lots. They have 7,217 residential vacant lots that they own, as well as several commercial, industrial, and urban. This issue that we have with vacant lots, especially on the east side, is something that's talked about in The Harder We Run. And they talk about how over the years the city has demolished several homes and owns the right to the lot, but they haven't really sold the lot. They're kind of waiting for maybe something to come along. But in the meantime, these lots sit vacant, and they're not well kept, and they affect the other homes around it. They negatively affect property values, and again, we've talked about that in detail, why that's a bad thing. So this idea of, you know, these residents who are being relocated, instead of putting them in a different BMHA site, building them their own house, not only does it better their life, give them opportunity for the future, but it also would go a long way towards helping to revitalize the east side, you know, getting rid of some of these vacant lots that are just holding neighborhoods back. And the other thing with this piece is, you're probably wondering, okay, who's going to buy it? You know, who's going to pay for this? Well, the $1.8 billion estimate that I've been talking about for the South Park site, that number comes from the state report, the AECOM report, and that number already includes $100 million for relocating residents and businesses. I don't know the exact figures of what it would cost to build these houses, but I think that there's a way to do it, right? Like we need to be sensitive to people that would be displaced, but there's a way to do it so that it benefits them, because it's if we can find the way to do it to benefit them, it's worth it, because there's so much benefit for the city and the people that live here, both in Buffalo and Erie County, from all of the stuff that we've talked about in this presentation. So in summary, just kind of weighing the different options here, we have the Orchard Park option, of course, according to the New York State study, that's carries a price tag of about $1.4 billion, going on historical precedent for the public contribution to an NFL stadium being on average about 57% of the total cost. An estimated taxpayer contribution here for the stadium would be about $700 to $900 million in taxpayer money being spent on this football stadium. And I think, a lot of people, and rightfully so, are kind of hung up on that point. And for them, the issue is not where it goes or any of that. The issue is, I don't want my money being spent on this. I don't think this is a good use of my money as a taxpayer. And that's certainly valid. I would not, really argue with anybody on that point. But I think we have to realize is the reality of the situation. This is going to happen. The Bills are getting a new stadium. The Pegoolas have done their research. The state has done their research. Both sides have concluded that a renovation to the existing stadium is not on the table. A new stadium is being built, or the Bills are going to be leaving town. And I think the Pegoolas and the politicians, Mark Poloncarz, Kathy Hochul, none of them really want that option B of the Bills leaving town. The only real option here is a new stadium, and kind of like it or not, that's the price of doing business with the NFL. That's what's going to happen. Like it or not, we are going to be paying a lot of taxpayer money for a football stadium, and so I think we need to shift our focus beyond that fact and go towards looking at what are we getting for this massive unprecedented taxpayer investment. And when I look at Orchard Park, I honestly do not see a single tangible benefit to the taxpayers of this community, of the city of Buffalo, of the suburbs of Buffalo, Erie County. I am struggling to come up with any significant tangible benefit. There is $1.4 billion being spent to construct a stadium, and that's where the money's going, and not much else is coming back into the community, and I really don't see any good coming from that for the good of the community at large. The only thing you could argue is that, yes, the Bills are not going to be moving to a different city, so at least we have that. But I think for this insane record-setting amount of taxpayer money, we need to demand better for this area. We deserve more. We deserve better. And I think in this presentation we've outlined the countless both immediate, short-term, and long-term benefits socially, economically, in terms of poverty, breaking the cycle of poverty, improving health outcomes, improving, lowering unemployment rates. All of these things are possible, and I think likely with a stadium built on the South Park site and these associated expansions to the public transportation system, expansion of the Metro Rail, etc. And when you think about this, Rocco Termini, actually, if you look at the reference there, makes a compelling argument that with tax credits and stuff that I don't fully understand well, but he can explain it a lot better than me, that it could actually be cheaper, okay, to build the stadium in the city. But even if it was more expensive, right? So we're saying $1.8 billion at South Park. So if using that 57% public number, we're probably talking at least $1 billion, maybe more. Maybe Rocco's right. Maybe it's less. Maybe it's about the same as Orchard Park. But suppose it's more. Even if it's an extra $200 million more, I would just beg you to consider that is worth it, because we're going to be spending 700 to 900 in Orchard Park, and what are we getting for it? So if we have to pay a little bit more to get just innumerable benefits for this community, now and in the future, it is infinitely worth it. So in closing, I encourage all of you to think really critically about what is at stake here for the long-term future of Buffalo and Erie County. I truly believe this is a watershed moment in the history of Buffalo, and we have the potential to kind of go one of two ways here. And I would really hate to look back 30 years, 40 years from now at this time period and wonder what could have been. Right now the zeitgeist in the city is ripe. There's progress, there's change, there's growth. So many good things are happening here. Longstanding city planning errors are finally on the verge of being corrected. The link there under the corrected word goes to an article talking about the momentum and progress towards finally restoring the Humboldt Parkway neighborhood, which is long overdue. That neighborhood and the beautiful Olmsted historic Humboldt Parkway was devastated by the 33 highway that was built right down the middle of the parkway, just disconnecting that neighborhood from the rest of the city, destroying businesses, etc. There's considerable momentum towards that being righted, towards covering up the 33 and on the surface reconnecting the parkway and that historic neighborhood. So many good things are happening here. The population is growing, not just in Buffalo but in Erie County for the first time in 70 years, and we just need to keep that going. We need that progress and growth to continue, and a Bill Stadium built in the city, along with these public transportation expansions that we've talked about in this presentation today, it has the power to truly transform our city back to the glory and power that it had at the beginning of the 20th century. And it has the power to do that in an equitable fashion, in a fashion that has social and economic benefits for everybody. I encourage you to not just think about what this could do for you, but for your neighbor, for your children, for the future, and to look past the taxpayer money piece, because like it or not, that's what's going to happen. That's the reality of the situation. Instead, shift your focus towards demanding that money goes to a stadium, and more largely a city planning project that best serves the needs of the community at large, that's paying for it both now and for generations to come. And that, to me, is clearly Bills in Buffalo. So thank you for your time and listening to this. I encourage you to, if you're interested, check out our Facebook page that has tons of information, updates, ways to get involved, news, etc. Instagram as well. The change.org website is where we have our petition that you can sign to help let our elected officials like Mark Polenkars and Kathy Hochul, who are negotiating with the Bagoolas, know how we feel. So please sign that petition to show your support for this cause. If you want to take it a step further and show off your support to others in the community, you can get a lawn sign, which we're starting to see pop up now around the city. You can get one of those graciously through Zoom Buffalo, who's agreed to produce this sign for us. And if you are so inclined to help donate, we do have a GoFundMe page as well, and that money really goes towards research and promoting the cause. None of that money is going towards anybody involved in Bills in Buffalo. We don't make any money, nor do we want any money. We just want Bills in Buffalo. So these are the references, and again, thank you for your time, and go Bills.